The autumn rain pelted against the windows of Highgrove House as Charles sat in his study, surrounded by stacks of correspondence that seemed to multiply with each passing day. The weight of his royal duties had never felt heavier, and lately, something else gnawed at him, a persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right in his marriage to Camilla. It had started with small things, phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, hushed conversations with her lady-in-waiting that ceased the moment he approached, Camilla's sudden interest in taking long walks alone through the gardens, claiming she needed time to think. After decades of knowing her, Charles recognized when something was troubling his wife, but she had become increasingly distant whenever he tried to discuss it. The king rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache that came with stress. Tomorrow marked their 18th wedding anniversary, and instead of planning a celebration, he found himself questioning whether he truly knew the woman he had married. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had waited so long to be with Camilla, had endured years of public scrutiny and personal sacrifice to make her his wife, only to now feel as though she was slipping away from him. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting to see one of his private secretaries with yet another document requiring his attention. Instead, Camilla appeared in the doorway, her silver hair slightly disheveled from the wind. She wore a cream-colored cardigan that he had always been fond of, but her usual warm smile seemed forced. "Darling, I wanted to let you know I'll be going to London tomorrow morning," she said, her voice carrying an odd tension. "There are some appointments I need to attend to." Charles looked up from his papers, studying her face. "On our anniversary? I thought we had planned a quiet dinner together." A flicker of something guilt, perhaps, crossed her features before she composed herself. "Oh, yes, of course. I'll be back by evening. These are just some personal matters that can't be delayed." "What sort of personal matters?" The question came out more sharply than he had intended. But Charles couldn't help himself. The secrecy was becoming unbearable. Camilla's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Nothing that should concern you, Charles. Just some old business I need to sort through." The phrase "old business" sent a chill through him. In their world, old business often meant secrets that could destroy reputations, end careers, or worse. He had learned this lesson painfully during his first marriage, when private matters had become public scandals. "Camilla, we've been through too much together for secrets. If something is troubling you—" "Nothing is troubling me," she interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. "I simply have some affairs to put in order, that's all." She turned to leave, then paused. "Charles, do you ever think about the past? About the choices we've made?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific. Just, sometimes I wonder if we can ever truly escape our histories." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him with more questions than answers. Charles stared at the empty doorway, his mind racing. Camilla had always been straightforward with him, even when the truth was painful. This evasiveness was completely out of character. That evening, as they shared what should have been a comfortable dinner, Charles observed his wife with new attention. She pushed her food around her plate, barely eating, and her responses to his attempts at conversation were distracted at best. When she excused herself early, claiming exhaustion, Charles remained in the dining room long after the staff had cleared the table. Unable to sleep, Charles found himself wandering the halls of Highgrove in the early hours of the morning. The house held so many memories of their life together: quiet evenings by the fire, morning conversations over breakfast, shared laughter over their grandchildren's antics. Yet tonight, those memories felt fragile, as though they might shatter if he examined them too closely. As he passed Camilla's private sitting room, he noticed a sliver of light beneath the door. Curious, he gently pushed it open and found her seated at her writing desk, a small stack of yellowed letters beside her. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't notice his presence immediately. "Can't sleep either?" he asked softly. Camilla startled, quickly gathering the letters and sliding them into a drawer. "Charles, you frightened me. I'm sorry. I saw the light and thought you might want some company." He stepped into the room, noting how she positioned herself between him and the desk. "What were you reading?" "Quote, just some old correspondence. Nothing important." but Charles had caught a glimpse of the handwriting on one of the envelopes, and it wasn't anything he recognized. The writing was bold, masculine, and definitely not from anyone in their usual circle of friends and family. Camilla, I know something is bothering you. We've been together too long for me not to notice when you're troubled. Please, just tell me what's wrong. For a moment, her composure cracked, and he saw something in her eyes that looked almost like fear. Some things are better left in the past, Charles. Trust me on this. How can I trust you when you won't even tell me what this is? The words hung between them, heavy with implications. Camilla's face paled, and for a moment, Charles thought she might finally confide in him. Instead, she stood abruptly. I think we should both try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. As she moved toward the door, Charles made a decision that would change everything. I'm coming with you to London tomorrow. Camilla stopped so suddenly that she nearly lost her balance. That's not necessary, darling. You have your own appointments. I can reschedule them. We're married, Camilla. We should face whatever this is together. No. The sharpness of her response surprised them both. She immediately tried to soften it. I mean, this is something I need to handle alone. Please, Charles, just give me this. The plea in her voice was unmistakable, but so was his growing conviction that whatever she was hiding could threaten everything they had built together. As Camilla left the room, Charles remained behind, staring at the desk where those mysterious letters had been. The next morning arrived gray and dreary, matching Charles's mood. He watched from his study window as Camilla's car disappeared down the drive. Her departure earlier than she had originally planned. Something about her hurried exit only reinforced his suspicions that she was trying to avoid any chance of him following her. Unable to concentrate on his official duties, Charles found himself thinking about those letters. The glimpse he had caught of the handwriting nagged at him. There was something familiar about it, though he couldn't place where he might have seen it before. The boldness of the script suggested someone confident, probably educated, and definitely someone who had felt comfortable enough with Camilla to write to her regularly, judging by the thickness of that stack of correspondence. By mid-morning, Charles had made up his mind. He called his private secretary and cleared his afternoon schedule, then contacted his security detail to prepare for an unscheduled trip to London. If Camilla was determined to keep secrets from him, he would have to uncover the truth himself. The drive to London gave him time to think about what he might discover. His mind conjured scenarios ranging from the relatively benign, perhaps an old friend facing difficulties, to the potentially devastating. In their position, any secret had the potential to become a scandal, and scandals had the power to destabilize not just their marriage but the monarchy itself. As the familiar skyline of London came into view, Charles felt a knot of anxiety form in his stomach. Part of him wanted to turn around, to go home and pretend that everything was normal. But the larger part of him knew that he couldn't continue living with this uncertainty. Whatever Camilla was hiding, whatever these mysterious letters contained, he needed to know the truth. His security team had discreetly made inquiries about Camilla's whereabouts, and Charles was surprised to learn that she had not gone to any of her usual haunts, not to her favorite shops, not to see any of her known friends, and definitely not to any official appointments. Instead, she had been spotted entering a nondescript office building in Bloomsbury, an area she rarely visited. Charles had his driver park across the street from the building, and he waited. The uncertainty was agonizing. Every few minutes, he found himself checking his watch, calculating how long she had been inside. What kind of business could she possibly have in such an unremarkable location? After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Charles saw Camilla emerge from the building. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her posture. She looked around nervously before getting into her car, as though checking to see if anyone had followed her. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, Charles made his decision. He instructed his protection officer to accompany him into the building, while the others maintained their positions outside. The lobby was small and uninspiring, with a directory listing various professional services, solicitors, accountants, a few consulting firms. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up as they approached. "May I help you?" Charles hesitated for a moment, then decided on a direct approach. "I believe my wife was just here to see someone. Her name is Camilla Parker Bowles. Well, Camilla Windsor now. I was wondering if you could tell me who she was meeting with." The woman's expression immediately became guarded. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss our client's business with anyone, even family members. I understand your discretion, but this is quite important. Could you at least tell me which office she visited?" After a moment's consideration, the receptionist softened slightly. "Suite 3B. That's Mr. Harrison's office. But really, sir, you should speak with your wife about whatever concerns you have." Charles thanked her and took the stairs to the third floor, his heart pounding with each step. Suite 3B bore a simple brass nameplate: J. Harrison, Private Investigations. The sight of those words hit Charles like a physical blow. A private investigator? What could Camilla possibly need with a private investigator? He knocked on the door, and a voice called for him to enter. The man behind the desk was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked up from a file on his desk, and Charles saw recognition flash across his features. "Your Majesty," Harrison said, rising quickly from his chair. This is unexpected. Mr. Harrison, I believe you've been working with my wife on some matter. I'm here to find out what that matter is." The investigator's face became professionally neutral. "I'm afraid I can't discuss my client's affairs, even with their spouses. Confidentiality is the cornerstone of my business. Mr. Harrison, I am not just any spouse. I am the King of England. And if my wife is involved in something that could affect the crown, I have a right to know." Charles could see the man weighing his options, clearly torn between professional ethics and the reality of who stood before him. Finally, Harrison spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, I can tell you that your wife has been concerned about some historical matters that she felt needed investigation. Maybe in 10, she's been very thorough in wanting to ensure that certain information remains properly contained." "What kind of information?" "I really can't say more without Mrs. Windsor's permission." Charles felt his patience wearing thin. "Mr. Harrison, whatever my wife has hired you to investigate, whatever she's trying to keep hidden, it's clearly causing her tremendous distress. As her husband, I need to know what's happening so I can help her." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Charles could see the internal debate playing out on Harrison's face. Finally, the investigator made his decision. "Your Majesty, what I'm about to tell you must remain confidential until you've had a chance to speak with your wife. She hired me to investigate some letters she's been receiving over the past several months. Letters from someone claiming to have information about her past that could be compromising." The words hit Charles like ice water. "What kind of information?" "The specifics are complex, but essentially, someone has been threatening to reveal details about certain relationships and events from before your marriage. Events that, if made public, could cause significant embarrassment to both your wife and the royal family." Charles sank into the chair across from Harrison's desk, his mind reeling. "Are these threats credible? That's what I was hired to determine. And I'm afraid the answer is yes. The person making these claims has documentation to support them. Letters, photographs, financial records. Your wife has been trying to find a way to neutralize the threat without involving you or causing a scandal." The room seemed to spin around Charles. All of Camilla's recent behavior suddenly made sense: the secretiveness, the anxiety, the mysterious phone calls. She had been trying to protect him, trying to handle this threat on her own. "Who is making these threats?" Harrison hesitated again, then opened the file on his desk. "A man named Marcus Thornley. According to my investigation, he had a relationship with your wife many years ago, long before your marriage. Apparently, he's fallen on hard times and sees this as an opportunity to improve his financial situation." The name meant nothing to Charles. But then again, Camilla's life before their marriage had included relationships he had never inquired about in detail. They had both agreed that the past was the past. What does he want? Money. Initially. But my investigation suggests his demands have been escalating. He's no longer just looking for a payoff, he seems to want something more. Charles felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of more? That's what concerns me, Your Majesty. His recent communications suggest he wants to meet with your wife in person. He claims he has something to show her that could change everything. The implications were terrifying. Charles immediately thought of his family's security, of the potential dangers that came with meeting unknown individuals who had already demonstrated their willingness to engage in blackmail. Where is my wife supposed to meet this man? Harrison looked uncomfortable. That's the other reason I advised against it. He wants to meet her at a private location, away from any security or witnesses. Mrs. Windsor has been considering it because she's desperate to resolve this situation, but I've told her it could be dangerous. Charles felt panic rising in his chest. When is this meeting supposed to take place? Tonight, Your Majesty. 7 o'clock at a cottage in Surrey that he claims holds significance to their past relationship. Charles checked his watch. It was already past 5 o'clock. If Camilla was planning to go to this meeting alone, she could be walking into a trap. The thought of her facing this threat by herself, of her being in potential danger because she was trying to protect him, was unbearable. Mr. Harrison, I need you to give me this man's exact location and any other information you have about him. Now. Over 1. As Harrison gathered the relevant files, Charles's mind raced with possibilities. None of them were good. At best, this Marcus Thornley was simply a desperate man looking for money. At worst, he could be someone with far more sinister intentions. Either way, Charles couldn't allow Camilla to face this alone. The drive back to Highgrove was the longest of Charles's life. Harrison had provided him with detailed information about Marcus Thornley, a man who had indeed had a relationship with Camilla in the 1,970 seconds before Charles and Camilla had begun their own romantic involvement. According to the investigator's research, Thornley had been a relatively successful businessman at the time, but a series of poor investments and personal problems had left him in dire financial straits. What worried Charles most was that Thornley seemed to know details about Camilla's life that went beyond what a casual acquaintance might know. The letters Harrison had shown him contained references to private moments, shared secrets, and intimate details that suggested their relationship had been more serious than Charles had realized. As his car pulled up to Highgrove, Charles saw that Camilla had returned. Her car was parked in its usual spot, but something about the way it was positioned hurriedly, not quite straight, suggested she had been in a rush. He found her in their bedroom, changing clothes with an urgency that immediately set off alarm bells. She had selected a simple black outfit, the kind she might wear when she wanted to avoid attention. Going somewhere? He asked from the doorway. Camilla spun around, her face pale. Charles, I didn't expect you back so soon. I can see that. Are you planning to meet Marcus Thornley tonight? The color drained completely from Camilla's face, and for a moment, Charles thought she might faint. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. How do you know about Marcus? I know about all of it, Camilla. The letters, the threats, the blackmail. I know you've been trying to handle this alone to protect me. Charles moved into the room, sitting beside her on the bed. What I don't know is why you felt you couldn't trust me with this. Tears began to flow down Camilla's cheeks. Because I was ashamed. Because what Marcus knows about me, about us, it could destroy everything we've built. Your reputation, the monarchy, our family. What could possibly be that devastating? Camilla looked at him with eyes full of pain and regret. The relationship I had with Marcus wasn't just romantic, Charles. There were things that happened. Decisions I made that I've never told you about. Things that, if they became public, would make the scandals of your first marriage look like minor gossip. Charles felt his world tilting on its axis, but he forced himself to remain calm. Tell me. I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's why I have to meet with him tonight. I have to find out what he really wants, what it will take to make him go away. Absolutely not. Charles's voice carried the authority of kingship. You are not meeting this man alone. If he's dangerous enough to threaten blackmail, he's dangerous enough to harm you. Then what do you suggest? He's made it clear that if I don't meet with him tonight, he'll go to the press with everything he has. Our anniversary will be remembered as the day the monarchy was rocked by scandal. Charles took her hands in his, feeling how cold they were despite the warmth of the room. We face this together. Whatever he knows, whatever he threatens to reveal, we deal with it as a team. That's what marriage means, Camilla. That's what we promised each other. For the first time in weeks, he saw hope flicker in his wife's eyes. But it was quickly replaced by fear. You don't understand what you're asking, Charles. Some secrets are too dangerous to share, even with the people we love most. As evening approached, Charles realized that this night would determine not just the future of his marriage, but possibly the future of the monarchy itself. Whatever secrets Camilla was hiding, whatever Marcus Thornley knew, the truth would finally come to light. And Charles wasn't certain they would survive it. The cottage in Surrey stood like a forgotten memory against the darkening sky, its stone walls weathered by decades of English rain and wind. Charles observed it from their car, hidden among the trees at the end of the narrow lane. Despite his insistence that Camilla shouldn't face Marcus Thornley alone, she had ultimately convinced him to let her make the initial contact, while he and their security team remained close enough to intervene if needed. "This place," Camilla whispered, her voice barely audible in the confines of the car. "I haven't been here in over 40 years. Charles studied his wife's profile in the dim light. Her face held a mixture of nostalgia and dread that made his stomach clench with anxiety. "What happened here, Camilla?" She closed her eyes, as if trying to block out memories that refused to stay buried. "Marcus and we spent a summer here in 1974. His family owned this cottage, and we would come here when we needed to escape from London, from the expectations, from everyone who thought they knew what was best for us." The year 1974. Charles calculated quickly that would have been during one of their separations, a period when he had been traveling extensively and their relationship had been uncertain. He had known Camilla was seeing other people during that time, but he had never imagined it had been serious enough to involve shared hideaways and intimate summers. "Were you in love with him?" The question came out before Charles could stop himself, and he immediately regretted it. This wasn't the time for jealousy or insecurity. Camilla opened her eyes and looked at him with a sadness that seemed to encompass decades of complicated choices. "I thought I was. At the time, it felt like love. Looking back, I think it was more about rebellion, about choosing something different from what everyone expected. Marcus was everything that my family disapproved of. Not wealthy enough. Not from the right background. Not suitable for a girl like me, but you stayed with him for an entire summer. More than that." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Charles, there are things about that time that I've never told anyone. Things that Marcus knows and could use to destroy not just me, but you, our children. Everything we've worked to build." Before Charles could respond, a figure emerged from the cottage. Even in the fading light, there was no mistaking Marcus Thornley. He was tall and lean, with silver hair that caught the light from the cottage windows. Despite his apparent financial difficulties, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew he held powerful cards. Camilla reached for the car door handle, but Charles caught her arm. 5 minutes. If you're not back in 5 minutes, I'm coming in, she nodded. Though they both knew that 5 minutes could be an eternity when secrets were being revealed. Charles watched her walk up the cottage path, noting how her steps slowed as she approached the door, as if each step took her further back into a past she had tried to forget. Marcus greeted her with a familiarity that made Charles's chest tighten. Not romantic familiarity, but something deeper, the ease of two people who had once known each other's secrets, who had shared intimacies that went beyond the physical. The cottage door closed behind them, leaving Charles alone with his thoughts and fears. Through the windows, he could see shadows moving, could imagine the conversation taking place inside. What could Marcus possibly know that was so devastating? What secrets from a summer 40 years ago could threaten the monarchy in the present? His radio crackled with a message from his security team. They had positioned themselves around the cottage's perimeter, ready to move at his signal. The professional part of Charles's mind appreciated their thoroughness, but the human part of him wished this was just a bad dream from which he could wake up. Inside the cottage, Camilla stood in what had once been their makeshift living room. The furniture was different now, but the bones of the place remained the same. The fireplace where they had spent countless evenings talking about their dreams, the window seat where she had read to him from books of poetry, the narrow staircase that led to the bedroom, where they had planned a future that would never come to pass. "It's smaller than I remembered," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everything seems smaller when we look back, doesn't it? Except our mistakes. Those tend to grow larger with time." "What do you want, Marcus?" "The man I knew 40 years ago wouldn't resort to blackmail and threats. The man you knew 40 years ago had options. He had a future. He had hope." Marcus moved to the mantelpiece, where several photographs were displayed. "Do you remember this one?" He held up a picture that made Camilla's blood run cold. It showed her and Marcus together, but they weren't alone. There was a third person in the photograph. A young woman whose presence in that cottage, during that summer, represented a secret that Camilla had carried for 4 decades. "Sarah," Camilla breathed, sinking into one of the chairs. "My sister Sarah," Marcus confirmed. "The sister you convinced me to hide when she needed help. The sister whose problems we solved in a way that would destroy your precious royal reputation if anyone ever found out." The memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. Sarah Thornley had been 19 years old, pregnant, and desperate. In 1974, options for unmarried pregnant women were limited, especially for someone from a conservative family like the Thornleys. When Marcus had come to Camilla in desperation, asking for help, she had used her family connections to arrange something that was technically legal, but morally questionable, and absolutely scandalous by royal standards. "We helped her," Camilla said defensively. "We gave her choices when she had none. We falsified documents. We bribed officials. We arranged for an adoption that involved money changing hands in ways that would be considered criminal today. And you used your family name to make it all happen." The weight of those long-ago decisions pressed down on Camilla like a physical force. At the time, it had seemed like the right thing to do, a way to help a frightened young woman while protecting her from family shame and societal judgment. Looking back through the lens of 4 decades and her current position, she could see how easily it could be twisted into a scandal that would destroy everything. "Sarah got the help she needed," Camilla said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The baby was placed with a loving family. Everyone involved moved on with their lives. Everyone except the baby," Marcus said coldly. "Did you know that he's been searching for his birth parents? Did you know that he's hired investigators of his own? Did you know that the trail is leading him directly to that falsified paperwork that bears your signature?" Camilla felt the room spinning around her. "That's impossible." The records were sealed. Sealed records can be unsealed, especially when there's evidence of fraud. And there is evidence, Camilla. Documents with your real signature next to false information. Financial transactions that can be traced back to your family's accounts. Witnesses who are still alive and might be willing to talk if the price is right. The true scope of her vulnerability began to dawn on Camilla. This wasn't just about an old relationship, or even about questionable decisions made in youth. This was about documented evidence of activities that could be characterized as criminal, involving the royal family's name and resources. "What do you want?" she asked again, though she dreaded the answer. Marcus pulled out a thick envelope from his jacket. "These are copies of everything I have, the original documents, the financial records, the photographs. There are also statements from people who were involved, including the doctor who falsified the birth certificate, and the lawyer who arranged the adoption. And if I don't give you what you want? Tomorrow morning, copies of everything go to every major newspaper in Britain. By evening, your husband will be facing the biggest scandal of his reign, and you'll be facing criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy." Camilla stared at the envelope, knowing that her entire future hung in the balance. "How much do you want?" Marcus laughed, but the sound was bitter. "Money isn't what I want anymore, Camilla. I've moved beyond that." "Then what?" "I want you to arrange for my son to meet his biological father." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. "Your son?" "The baby Sarah was carrying wasn't just any baby, Camilla. It was mine. Sarah and I had been involved in a relationship that our families would never have accepted. When she became pregnant, we convinced everyone, including you, that it was the result of a brief affair with someone unsuitable. But the truth is, That baby was my son, and I've spent 40 years wondering what happened to him. The cottage seemed to tilt around Camilla as the full magnitude of the deception became clear. She had helped arrange an adoption based on false information, not knowing that the baby's father was someone who would have wanted to raise him. Marcus had allowed his own son to be given away to protect a secret relationship with his sister. "You lied to me," she whispered. "We all lied, Camilla, but my lies only hurt my family. Your lies involved fraud, bribery, and the royal family. Which do you think the press will find more interesting?" Outside in the car, Charles checked his watch for the 10th time in 2 minutes. 7 minutes had passed since Camilla had entered the cottage, and every instinct he had was screaming that something was wrong. The conversation inside seemed intense. He could see gestures and movement through the windows, but he couldn't tell if Camilla was in immediate danger or just facing difficult truths. His radio crackled again. "Your Majesty, we have movement. Someone else is approaching the cottage." Charles felt his blood turn to ice. "How many?" "Just one person, but they're coming from the direction of the main road. Should we intercept?" "Negative. Observe and report." Through his binoculars, Charles watched as a second car pulled up to the cottage. A young man emerged, perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair and a purposeful stride. There was something familiar about his features, though Charles couldn't place where he might have seen him before. Inside the cottage, the sound of another car arriving sent panic through both Camilla and Marcus. "You said we would be alone," Camilla accused. "We are," Marcus replied, moving to the window. When he saw the young man approaching, his face went pale. "Oh God, he found us." "Who is that?" "My son. The baby from the adoption. His name is David, and he's been tracking down everyone involved in his adoption for the past 2 years." The front door opened without a knock, and David Thornley stepped into the cottage. The family resemblance to Marcus was unmistakable, but there was something else about him that made Camilla's heart skip a beat. His eyes, his posture, the way he carried himself there was something that reminded her of someone else entirely. "Hello, Father," David said, his voice carrying decades of suppressed anger. "And you must be Lady Camilla Parker Bowles. Or should I say, Your Majesty?" The formal address sent chills through Camilla. This young man had clearly done his research and knew exactly who he was dealing with. "David, I can explain," Marcus began, but his son cut him off. 43 years, Father. 43 years I've been wondering who I was, where I came from, why I was given away. 43 years of feeling like something was missing from my life." David turned to Camilla, and she saw the intelligence in his eyes that spoke of someone who had uncovered truths that perhaps should have remained hidden. "Your Majesty, I've spent considerable time and money investigating my adoption. What I found has been very interesting. Documents with your signature, financial records showing payments from accounts connected to your family, evidence of an adoption process that violated several laws." "David," Camilla said carefully, "I understand you must have many questions about your past. But threatening people isn't the way to get answers. I'm not threatening anyone, I'm simply sharing information. For instance, did you know that my adoptive parents kept detailed records of everything related to my adoption? They were suspicious from the beginning that something wasn't quite legal about the whole process." David pulled out a folder of his own. "They documented every meeting, every payment, every suspicious circumstance. When they died 5 years ago, they left all of it to me with a letter explaining their concerns." He opened the folder and spread several documents on the cottage's small table. These show a pattern of fraud that went far beyond simply helping an unmarried mother. Money changed hands that shouldn't have. Officials were bribed. Documents were falsified. And all of it was orchestrated by someone with enough influence to make the system bend to their will. Camilla looked at the papers and felt the last of her hopes crumble. The evidence was damning, and it was comprehensive. Even if she could find a way to discredit Marcus, David had independent documentation that corroborated everything. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "I want the truth. All of it. I want to know who my real parents are, why I was given away, and who was responsible for the lies that have shaped my entire life." "The truth," Marcus said quietly, "is that your real father isn't who any of us thought he was." Both Camilla and David stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" David demanded. Marcus sat down heavily, looking older than his years. Sarah confessed something to me just before she died last year. Something she had kept secret even from me. You aren't my son, David. I'm not your biological father. The cottage fell silent, except for the sound of the wind picking up outside. Camilla felt a terrible certainty beginning to form in her mind. A possibility so devastating that she couldn't bring herself to voice it. Then who is my father? David asked. Marcus looked at Camilla with something that might have been pity. According to Sarah, it was someone Camilla brought to the cottage several times that summer. Someone who was supposed to be helping with the adoption arrangements, but who became personally involved with Sarah. The blood drained from Camilla's face as memories she had suppressed came flooding back. The young man who had helped arrange the adoption, the one who had access to the right officials and knew how to navigate the system, the one who had spent time at the cottage, ostensibly handling paperwork but who had developed a friendship with Sarah. Charles, she whispered. Outside in the car, Charles felt his radio crackle with another message from his security team, but he barely heard it. Through his binoculars, he had been watching the scene inside the cottage unfold, and something about the young man's profile when he turned toward the window had triggered a memory that made no sense. The young man looked familiar not because Charles had seen him recently, but because he resembled someone from long ago. Someone Charles had worked with on charitable projects in the 1970s. Someone who had needed help with a delicate family situation. Someone who had looked very much like Charles himself. As the truth began to dawn on him, Charles realized that the secrets Camilla had been trying to protect weren't just about her past, they were about his own. And the devastating revelation that was unfolding inside the cottage would change not just their marriage, but the very nature of the royal succession. The young man in the cottage wasn't just Marcus Thornley's son. He was Charles's son, a son he had never known existed. Born from a brief relationship he had forgotten about decades ago, hidden away through an adoption process that Camilla had helped arrange to protect them all. And now that son was back, with evidence that could destroy everything. The silence in the cottage stretched until it became unbearable. David Thornley stood frozen, processing the implications of what Marcus had just revealed. Camilla sat with her head in her hands, decades of carefully constructed defenses crumbling around her. The weight of the secret she had carried for so long was finally crushing her. That's impossible, David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Charles wasn't involved with Sarah. He was involved with you. Camilla looked up, and both men could see the tears streaming down her face. Charles and I weren't together constantly in 1974. We were young. We were both seeing other people, trying to figure out what we wanted from life. When he came to help with your adoption, he spent several weeks here, working out the details. You're saying that the future King of England had an affair with my mother while he was supposedly helping arrange my adoption? The harsh reality of the situation was even more devastating than David had imagined. Not only had he been lied to about his parentage, but his biological father was the monarch, making him an unacknowledged son of the crown. It wasn't an affair, Camilla said desperately. It was. Charles was trying to help. Sarah was frightened and alone. He comforted her. They formed a connection. It only lasted a few weeks, and by the time anyone realized Sarah was pregnant, Charles was already committed to other obligations. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. So my sister was pregnant with the future king's child, and instead of acknowledging it, you all conspired to make it disappear through a fraudulent adoption. It wasn't like that, Camilla protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Looking back through the lens of 4 decades, she could see how their actions appeared. A scared young woman had been taken advantage of by someone in a position of power, and then silenced through an adoption process that involved bribery and falsified documents. David pulled out his phone. I need to call the investigators I've been working with. They need to know what we've discovered. Wait, Camilla said urgently. Please, just wait. Let me call Charles. Let him come here so we can discuss this properly. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus said. This has gone beyond family discussions. We're talking about fraud, conspiracy, and possibly worse. But David was looking at Camilla with something that might have been curiosity rather than anger. You really care about him, don't you? About Charles? I love him. I've loved him most of my life, despite everything that's happened between us. This secret, I've carried it to protect him, to protect the monarchy, to protect you, to protect me, by letting me grow up thinking I was abandoned, by letting me believe my biological parents didn't want me, by keeping you safe from a scandal that could have destroyed your life before it began, Camilla said fiercely. Do you have any idea what it would have meant for you to be acknowledged as an illegitimate royal child in 1974? You would have been hounded by the press your entire life. You would have lived under constant scrutiny, constant judgment. Your adoptive parents gave you a normal life. Outside, Charles had made his decision. The conversation inside the cottage had gone on far too long, and he could see through the windows that the situation was becoming increasingly tense. Whatever secrets were being revealed, whatever threats were being made, he couldn't allow Camilla to face them alone any longer. I'm going in, he told his security team. Maintain your positions, but be ready to move if I signal. The cottage door opened before Charles could knock. Camilla stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears but her posture resolute. Charles, she said quietly, I think it's time you met your son. The words hit Charles like a physical blow, but some part of him had already been preparing for this moment since he had recognized David's profile through the cottage window. The resemblance was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. The same jawline, the same way of holding his shoulders, the same expression of concentration that Charles saw in the mirror every day. Sarah Thornley, Charles said, the name coming back to him with devastating clarity. The summer of 1974. You remember, Camilla said, relief evident in her voice. I remember helping with an adoption. I remember a young woman who was frightened and alone. I remember thinking I was doing something good. Charles paused, the full implications hitting him. I don't remember. I mean, I didn't realize that she was carrying your child? Neither did anyone else. Until it was too late to change anything. Charles stepped into the cottage, and for the first time in nearly 44 years, he looked into the eyes of his firstborn son. The resemblance was so striking that denial was impossible. This was his child, grown into a man who had lived an entire life without knowing who his father was. David, Charles said, and was surprised by how naturally the name came to his lips. Your Majesty, David replied, his voice carefully neutral. I think, under the circumstances, you can call me Charles. Or, he hesitated, uncertain how to navigate this impossible situation. What would you like to call me? I'd like to call you the man who abandoned my mother and covered up my existence for 43 years. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Charles felt the weight of it, the justification behind David's anger. But he also felt the need to explain the complexities of what had actually happened. I didn't abandon your mother, Charles said carefully. I didn't know she was pregnant with my child. If I had known. What? What would you have done? Married her? Acknowledged me? Or found a different way to make the problem disappear? The question was fair, and Charles realized he didn't have a good answer. What would he have done if he had known Sarah was carrying his child? In 1974, he had been heir to the throne, bound by protocols and expectations that would have made acknowledging an illegitimate child extremely complicated. I don't know, Charles admitted. I like to think I would have found a way to take responsibility, but I honestly don't know what options would have been available. Marcus, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. The options that were available were the ones you took. Cover it up, falsify documents, pay bribes, and hope no one ever found out. We were trying to help, Camilla said defensively. Sarah didn't want to keep the baby. She was terrified of what her family would say, what society would think. The adoption gave the baby a chance at a normal life and gave Sarah a chance to move forward. But it was based on lies, David said. The adoptive parents were told my birth parents were young students who couldn't care for a child. They were never told about the royal connection, the illegal payments, or the falsified documents. They raised me believing I came from poverty, not from the palace. Charles sat down heavily in one of the cottage chairs, the weight of decades of consequences settling on his shoulders. What do you want from us now? What can we do to make this right? David pulled out a digital recorder and placed it on the table. I want the truth. All of it. On record. I want you to acknowledge who you are, what happened, and what you knew about the adoption. David, Camilla said urgently, you need to understand what you're asking. If this becomes public, it won't just affect Charles. It will affect the entire royal family, the government, the monarchy itself. And you think that's my problem? You think I should continue to live with lies to protect an institution that has spent my entire life pretending I don't exist? Charles looked at the recorder, understanding the choice he was being asked to make. He could deny everything, use his resources and influence to discredit David's claims, and probably maintain the status quo. Or he could tell the truth and face consequences that could end his reign and destroy the monarchy. Before we do anything, Charles said slowly, I need you to understand something. I may be your biological father, but I'm not the man who raised you. I'm not the man who taught you to ride a bicycle or helped you with your homework or comforted you when you were hurt. That man, your adoptive father, was your real father in every way that mattered. David's composure cracked slightly. My adoptive father died wondering if he had done the right thing by keeping the adoption secrets. He spent his last years worried that he had participated in something wrong by raising a child whose birth was surrounded by lies and bribes. He did do the right thing, Charles said firmly. Whatever mistakes were made by the adults involved, giving you a loving home was absolutely the right thing. But it was built on a foundation of fraud and conspiracy. Charles couldn't argue with that assessment. The more he learned about how David's adoption had been arranged, the more he realized how much illegal activity had been involved. Documents had been falsified, officials had been bribed, and the entire process had been conducted in a way that would be considered criminal by today's standards. What's done is done, Marcus said. The question now is what happens next. David has evidence that could bring down the monarchy. You have resources that could destroy David's life if you chose to use them. Where does that leave us? Charles looked around the cottage, taking in the faces of the three people whose lives had been shaped by decisions made in this very place 43 years ago. Camilla, who had carried this secret to protect him. Marcus, who had watched his sister suffer while believing she had given away his child. And David, who had grown up wondering about his identity while his biological father ruled a nation. It leaves us with a choice, Charles said finally. We can continue living with lies, or we can find a way to tell the truth that doesn't destroy everyone involved. And how do we do that? David asked. Charles reached for the recorder and turned it off. Not like this. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. No secret recordings. No ambush revelations. No tabloid scandals. If you want me to acknowledge you as my son, then let's do it properly. What do you mean? I mean a formal acknowledgement, a public statement, a proper introduction to your siblings and their families. A place in the royal succession if that's what you want. The cottage fell silent as everyone processed what Charles was offering. He was proposing to voluntarily trigger the biggest royal scandal in modern history. Charles, Camilla whispered, you can't be serious. The consequences. The consequences of continuing to lie will be worse than the consequences of telling the truth, Charles said. This secret has been poisoning our marriage, threatening our family, and causing pain to people we care about. It ends now. David stared at him in disbelief. You're actually willing to acknowledge me publicly? To admit to the fraud, the cover-up, everything? I'm willing to acknowledge you as my son. The rest. We'll work out a way to address it that doesn't send anyone to prison. There are statute of limitations issues, and much of what was done was technically legal at the time, even if it was morally questionable. Marcus shook his head. This is insane. Do you have any idea what this will do to Britain, to the Commonwealth, to the entire concept of monarchy? It will prove that the monarchy can survive truth, Charles said. That we're not so fragile that we can't acknowledge our mistakes and try to make them right. Camilla reached for Charles's hand. Are you sure about this? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. Charles squeezed her hand, drawing strength from the contact. I'm tired of living with secrets, Camilla. I'm tired of watching you suffer to protect mine. It's time to trust that our love is strong enough to survive the truth. David looked at the three older adults, seeing them clearly for the first time, not as conspirators or enemies, but as people who had made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. If you're really willing to do this, to acknowledge me publicly, then I'm willing to work with you to find a way that doesn't destroy everything. But I won't continue to pretend I don't exist. You shouldn't have to, Charles said. And you won't have to anymore. 6 months later, the announcement was made in a carefully crafted statement released simultaneously by Buckingham Palace and David Thornley himself. The king acknowledged David as his son, the result of a brief relationship in 1974, and expressed his regret that circumstances had prevented him from being part of David's life from the beginning. The scandal dominated headlines for weeks, but rather than destroying the monarchy, it seemed to humanize it. The king's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and take responsibility for his past actions was seen by many as evidence of integrity rather than weakness. David was granted a minor royal title and began taking on limited public duties, focusing on charitable work related to adoption services and family reunification. His adoptive parents were posthumously honored for their service in giving him a loving home. The investigation into the adoption irregularities was quietly closed when it was determined that the statute of limitations had expired on most potential charges, and that the primary motivation had been to help a young woman in distress rather than personal gain. Camilla and Charles's marriage not only survived the revelation but grew stronger. The secret that had threatened to destroy them became, paradoxically, the thing that finally allowed them to build a relationship based on complete honesty. Marcus Thornley received a generous settlement that allowed him to live comfortably for the rest of his life, and he became a grandfather figure to David, helping him understand the family history he had been denied. And in the cottage in Surrey, now purchased by the Crown and maintained as a private retreat, a plaque was installed that read simply, "Sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the truth." The truth had indeed been devastating when it was finally revealed. But as Charles had hoped, they had all proven strong enough to survive it, and wise enough to build something better from the ruins of their secrets.